I've learned that some insults don't need to be shouted to leave a bruise. Sometimes they're disguised as a laugh or a polite smile, followed by the words, "You can't afford it." My name is Margaret Lane, and I am 72 years old. For most of my life, I've been the kind of woman who smiles through hurt, nods at insults, and goes home to cry where no one can see. I was raised to be polite, to not make scenes, to keep my dignity even when it felt like my dignity was the only thing I had left. Maybe that's why this trip became so important to me. Not for the beaches, the food, or the sunshine, though I enjoy all those things. No, this was about something else entirely. This was about being underestimated one time too many. It all started over coffee at my kitchen table. My son, Michael, and his wife Jenna had stopped by. They were in that hurried, distracted way they always are when they have something they want to get over with. Jenna kept scrolling on her phone while Michael stirred sugar into his coffee. "We were thinking," Michael began, "of taking a family trip this spring. Something nice. We found this package deal. 7 nights, all inclusive. You'd love it, Mum." I smiled. "That sounds wonderful. Where to?" "Barcelona," Jenna said without looking up from her phone. "But, it's kind of pricey. We thought you might not be able to swing it right now. So maybe next time." The words hit like a small slap across the face. Quick, almost casual, but stinging all the same. Not be able to swing it, as if they had any idea what I could afford, as if they'd ever asked. I said nothing, just sipped my coffee while Jenna added, "We don't want you to feel left out, but these trips can be tiring. You might be more comfortable at home." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about money. This was about perception. To them, I was the aging mother they had to slow down for, the one they could pat on the hand and excuse from the table. I was sweet, fragile, and, let's be honest, an inconvenience. I didn't argue. I didn't tell them that I'd been to Barcelona before, years ago, when their father was still alive. I didn't tell them that the flight alone wouldn't scare me, or that my pension and savings were more than enough to cover such a trip. Instead, I nodded and said, "Of course I understand. You two have fun." Inside, I felt something old and familiar rising in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but the echo of every time in my life when someone decided for me what I could handle. I went to bed that night, replaying their voices, their pitying tones, and when I woke the next morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. It wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be cruel, but it would be unforgettable. They thought I couldn't afford the trip. They thought I wouldn't even try. They were wrong. I wish I could say this was the first time Michael and Jenna had made me feel small. But it wasn't. When your own children start to see you through a lens of limitation, it doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, like water wearing away stone. One day, they're asking for your advice. The next, they're speaking slower to you, as if you've forgotten how to keep up. I remember the first sting clearly. It was years ago at a family barbecue. I'd brought my famous lemon meringue pie, the one Michael used to request every year for his birthday. But when I set it on the dessert table, Jenna smiled politely and whispered, "Oh, Mom, you don't have to do all that. We have store-bought cheesecake. It's safer. As though I couldn't follow a recipe anymore, as though my hands had suddenly lost the skill they'd honed over decades. It became a pattern after that. Little things. They'd forget to invite me to outings because they assumed I'd be tired. They'd tell me not to worry about money when I offered to chip in, always in that same patronizing tone, the one that made it sound like I should be grateful they were even including me in the conversation. But I've never been one to flaunt what I have. After my husband passed, I managed our finances carefully. I paid off my house. I set aside money for travel, because he and I had promised each other that even if one of us was left behind, the other would keep exploring the world. I never told Michael the details, because it never seemed necessary. Until now. A week after that coffee conversation, I ran into Mrs. Howard from next door. She's a chatty woman, the kind who collects other people's business, like some people collect stamps. She leaned over the fence while I was trimming my rose bushes. "Barcelona, huh? That's exciting," she said with a grin. I froze. "Exciting? Oh, yes," she went on, lowering her voice like we were co-conspirators. "Jenna was telling someone at the grocery store about their big trip, said it's going to be just them and the kids. And," she gave me that sympathetic head tilt, "she said she didn't think you'd be able to keep up with all the walking and late nights." There it was again. That same quiet dismissal, now spread to strangers. I smiled at Mrs. Howard, thanked her for telling me, and finished trimming my roses in silence. But inside, something clicked into place. I could have confronted them right then, could have asked why they thought so little of me. But words can be brushed off, denied, laughed away. Actions, though, actions linger. That night, I sat at my desk with a cup of chamomile tea and opened my laptop. It took me less than an hour to find the same flight they were taking. I could tell by the departure time and destination. It matched what Mrs. Howard had mentioned. I didn't just book an economy seat. No, I booked first class. A window seat, directly across the aisle from the galley, where I knew I'd be served first, with space to stretch my legs and a glass of champagne in hand before we even left the runway. Then I booked a suite at a hotel I knew they couldn't afford. Not out of spite, at least that's what I told myself, but because I wanted this to be more than a point proved. I wanted to enjoy every moment without the shadow of their judgment over me. The funny thing was, the more I planned, the calmer I felt. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about reminding myself, and maybe them, that I was still the woman who could get on a plane to anywhere in the world without asking permission. And this time, I'd let my presence speak for itself. It's funny how fate sometimes hands you exactly the confirmation you need. In my case, it came in the form of a text message that wasn't meant for me. 2 weeks before their trip, my phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. It was from Michael. The preview on the screen read, "We should get to the airport early. Mum will—" Then it cut off. I frowned and opened it. Except, it wasn't just to me. It was to me and Jenna. Only the mom they were talking about was her mother. Apparently she was coming along too. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the half-folded sheet slipping from my hands. The rest of the message read, "Mom will need wheelchair assistance at boarding, and I don't want to deal with the lines if we get there late." So not only was Jenna bringing her mother, but they had assumed I couldn't handle the trip. Yet they were planning for someone else who actually needed help to be there instead. The irony was bitter enough to taste. I reread the message 3 times, my pulse quickening. Part of me wanted to hit reply all and say, "You're talking to the wrong mother." But the more I stared at it, the more I felt that same quiet calm I'd had the night I booked my ticket. Let them think I was home watering plants and watching daytime television. Let them think I couldn't keep up. The look on their faces would be worth every penny. Still, there was a moment, a sliver of doubt, where I asked myself if it was petty. Was I really going to spend all this money just to make a point? But then I remembered another trip, 10 years ago. They'd invited me to a cabin in the mountains for Christmas. I'd driven 6 hours in the snow to get there, only to find my room had been given to one of Jenna's cousins who'd decided last minute to come along. They'd set me up on a pull-out couch in the living room. Every time someone walked past, they'd murmur, "Sorry, Mum," as if my being there was an inconvenience. I'd spent that entire trip smiling, bringing out trays of cookies, offering to help with the kids, pretending it didn't bother me. But lying in that lumpy bed, I'd promised myself that the next time they underestimated me, I wouldn't just take it quietly. This was that next time. So I doubled down. I called the airline, Upgraded to the front row of first class for extra legroom. I ordered a new travel outfit, comfortable but elegant, a cream linen blouse, navy slacks, and a silk scarf the color of deep ocean water. I wanted to look like a woman who belonged exactly where she was sitting. Then I called the hotel. Yes, I'll need the airport transfer. And please confirm my reservation for the top floor suite. The young man on the phone chuckled warmly. You'll have the best view in the city, ma'am. That was exactly the point. The days leading up to the trip were quiet. I saw Michael once more when he stopped by to drop off some mail that had gone to his address. He made small talk about the weather and the price of groceries, never once mentioning Barcelona. I played along. But inside, my excitement simmered. Not the giddy excitement of a vacation. No. This was the anticipation of walking into a room where everyone has already decided who you are, and proving them entirely wrong. By the night before departure, my suitcase was packed, my documents were ready, and my alarm was set for an hour before dawn. Tomorrow, they would be boarding the same flight, and tomorrow, I wouldn't be in the seat they imagined for me, if they imagined me there at all. Tomorrow, I'd walk right past them. The morning of the flight, I woke before my alarm. The house was still and quiet, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. I made myself a small breakfast, toast, coffee, and half a grapefruit, and sat at the kitchen table with the light just beginning to spill through the blinds. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt steady, like I'd rehearsed this moment my whole life without knowing it. I dressed in the outfit I'd chosen, cream linen blouse, perfectly pressed navy slacks, the silk scarf tied neatly at my neck. My hair was set in soft waves, a touch of lipstick to bring back some colour. I looked in the mirror before leaving and thought, not for the first time, your late husband would have been proud to see you like this. I called the car service I'd arranged and was at the airport 2 hours before departure. The driver helped me with my luggage and wished me a safe and beautiful trip. I smiled. I intended to have both. Inside the terminal, I didn't go to the crowded general check-in line. I walked straight to the priority counter, where a young woman in a crisp blazer greeted me warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Lane. First class to Barcelona?" she said, her voice polite, but tinged with the recognition of someone who knew I was in the top tier of her day's passengers. "Yes, thank you," I replied, sliding over my passport. Within minutes, I had my boarding pass in hand, seat 2A, gleaming in a black ink. The boarding time printed beneath it felt like a secret appointment only I knew about. With my bag checked, I headed for the private lounge, leather chairs, warm lighting, quiet murmurs of conversation. It was a world apart from the chaos outside. I sipped fresh orange juice, read a few pages of my book, and let the minutes pass in the comfort they'd told me I couldn't handle. Boarding was announced for first class before the general passengers, but I decided to wait. I had something in mind. I left the lounge 5 minutes before the gate closed for economy passengers. By then, the line for boarding had vanished, except for a straggler or two. And there they were, Michael, Jenna, their kids, and her mother, standing near the jet bridge, already in their seats, judging by the absence of carry-ons. They didn't see me. Not yet. I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Lane." Walking down the jet bridge, I slowed just enough to time it perfectly. When I stepped onto the plane, the flight attendant greeted me, checked my seat number, and gestured toward the front. "Right this way, Miss Lane. First class on the left." And there they were, row 24, cramped seats by the wing, knees pressed against tray tables. Jenna's head was bent over a magazine. Michael was fiddling with the overhead vent. I walked past slowly, the silk scarf brushing lightly against my shoulder. I didn't smirk, didn't gloat, just offered the smallest, most polite nod when Jenna's eyes widened. Michael's head snapped up next. "Mum?" he blurted, but it was more question than greeting. I smiled softly, as though I'd just run into them at the grocery store. "Enjoy your flight," I said. And then I was past them, stepping into the wide, airy cabin of first class, where a flight attendant took my coat and offered champagne before we'd even left the ground. I sank into my seat, plush leather, endless legroom, and let the murmur of boarding announcements fade. Behind me, somewhere far back, they were processing what they'd just seen. And for the first time in years, I felt no need to explain myself. As the cabin door closed, I leaned back into the deep leather seat and felt an unfamiliar lightness settle over me. Not because I was flying to Barcelona, though I'd always loved that city, but because of the quiet reversal that had just unfolded. The flight attendant set a small tray on my table, a crystal flute of champagne, a linen napkin, and a dish of warm, mixed nuts. I took a slow sip and let my gaze drift toward the window. From here, the world below looked like it belonged to me alone. First class was calm. You could hear the soft hum of the engines, the occasional rustle of a newspaper. No clatter of meal carts banging down the aisle, no loud arguments over overhead bin space. Just space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Every so often, I imagined what was happening 22 rows behind me. I pictured Jenna shifting in her narrow seat, knees brushing the seat in front of her. I pictured Michael craning his neck to see where I'd gone, only to be met with the curtain that separated the cabins. I didn't feel cruel. I felt restored. They had drawn the picture of who I was supposed to be. Fragile, financially dependent, out of place. And I had quietly erased it with a single boarding pass. When the meal service began, I chose seared salmon with lemon butter, fresh asparagus, and a small tart for dessert. The presentation alone made me smile. China plates, polished silverware, a folded cloth napkin instead of the paper kind. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to stretch. As I stepped toward the front galley, I caught a glimpse past the curtain when it briefly opened for a crew member. Just a flash of economy, a cramped row, elbows bumping, Jenna's mother leaning forward with her head in her hands. I didn't linger. The flight attendants treated me with a courtesy I hadn't felt in years, addressing me by name, anticipating my needs. It wasn't about the luxury. It was about being seen as capable, deserving, and present. When we began our descent, I looked out at the sweep of the coastline, sunlight bouncing off the water. Barcelona shimmered in the distance, the streets and rooftops glowing in the late afternoon light. After landing, I was among the first to disembark. My suitcase was waiting for me on the priority carousel, already spinning slowly when I reached it. A driver holding a placard with my name stood just beyond the customs doors. "Mrs. Lane, welcome to Barcelona," he said, taking my bag. We walked past the taxi queue, where Michael and Jenna stood with their children, looking more travel-weary than I'd ever seen them. They didn't notice me. My driver led me straight to a sleek black car, and we were gone before they even loaded their luggage. The ride to the hotel was quiet, the city unfolding outside the tinted windows. I remembered the first time I'd come here with my husband, how we'd wandered for hours down narrow streets lined with balconies and flower boxes. I could almost hear his voice in my ear, telling me I was doing exactly the right thing now. At the hotel, a concierge greeted me in flawless English and escorted me to the elevator. The suite was on the top floor, as promised, with a balcony that looked out over the rooftops to the sea beyond. I stood there for a long while, the breeze warm against my face, and thought about how, in less than 24 hours, I'd already rewritten the story they'd tried to tell about me. Tomorrow, I would see them again, and tomorrow, I wouldn't need to say much at all. The next morning, I woke early, the sunlight spilling in across the pale curtains of the suite. I'd slept better than I had in months, the soft hum of the city below, a lullaby far gentler than the clock ticking in my quiet house back home. After breakfast on the balcony, fresh fruit, warm pastries, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead, I decided to take a walk through the Gothic quarter. I'd always loved those winding streets, the way each turn seemed to reveal a hidden cafe or a tiny shop selling handmade jewelry. It was there, under the shadow of an old stone archway, that I saw them. Michael and Jenna were at the corner, huddled over a map with her mother, while the kids darted between the shop doors. They hadn't seen me yet, so I lingered by a stall of leather handbags, pretending to browse. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Jenna's voice carried just far enough for me to catch. Michael muttered something I couldn't hear, then looked up and froze. "Mum," he said, his voice sharper than it needed to be. I smiled, like we'd just run into each other by happy accident. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Jenna blinked rapidly. "You're here?" She glanced at her mother, who frowned as if I'd committed some unspoken breach of etiquette. "Yes," I said simply. "I thought it might be nice to visit Barcelona again." I let the word again hang in the air. They exchanged a look I knew too well, a mix of confusion and the faintest pinch of irritation. "Where are you staying?" Michael asked. "Oh, just a little place near the water," I replied. No details. The less they knew, the more it would gnaw at them. The children, at least, seemed happy enough. "Grandma, are you coming with us today?" one of them asked. Jenna hesitated before saying, "We have a tour booked. It's, just for our group." "I understand," I said smoothly. "I have my own plans anyway." And I did. Plans they couldn't buy their way into even if they wanted to. After a polite nod, I left them standing in the square, still digesting the fact that I'd not only made the trip, but had done so on my own terms. Later that day, as I sat on the terrace of a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, a couple I'd met on the flight, Alan and Deborah, waved me over to join them. We'd struck up an easy conversation somewhere over the Atlantic, and they'd insisted we meet for lunch while in town. It was halfway through our meal, with a plate of paella between us, that I spotted Michael's family entering the same restaurant. They were led to a table near the back, close enough to see, but far enough they couldn't avoid watching me. Alan lifted his glass. "To unexpected friendships," he said warmly, and I clinked mine against his. I didn't look directly at Michael, but I could feel the shift in the air. Jenna's gaze flicking toward me every few minutes, Michael pretending not to notice. Her mother, however, looked directly at me once, and her expression said more than words could. "How dare you?" It made me want to laugh. I didn't, of course. I kept my smile polite, my posture relaxed, and my conversation flowing as though they were any other strangers in the room. When lunch was over, Alan insisted on walking me back toward my hotel. As we passed Michael's table, I caught his eye and offered a pleasant, "Enjoy the rest of your afternoon." He nodded stiffly, but his voice was too tight to match his words. "You too, Mum." I walked out into the sunshine, the warmth on my face feeling a lot like vindication. They had come here believing I couldn't afford the trip, couldn't handle the pace, couldn't belong. Now they had seen me not just here, but thriving. And we still had days left to go. 2 nights later, I received an invitation from the hotel concierge. It was for a private gala dinner at a historic villa overlooking the sea, limited seating, formal attire, and a guest list so exclusive that the tickets weren't even sold online. My first thought was that my husband would have loved it. My second thought was that this might be the perfect ending to my quiet little game. I arrived just before sunset, the air still warm, the sky painted in gold and rose. The villa's terrace was strung with fairy lights, a soft string quartet playing near the fountain. Guests mingled with glasses of sparkling cava, the scent of jasmine drifting through the courtyard. I was seated at a long table draped in white linen, surrounded by people I'd met through the hotel and my first-class flight companions. Conversation flowed easily, laughter carrying on the breeze. It felt like a world apart from the small, constricted space my son and his wife had tried to put me in, both on that plane and in life. Halfway through the first course, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Jenna. I didn't need to turn to picture her expression, half shock, half irritation. A moment later, Michael's voice followed, lower, tense. I told you, she's fine. I turned then, just enough to see them standing a few tables away. They weren't dressed for the evening. Jenna in a touristy sundress, Michael in a short-sleeved shirt. They looked out of place, and from the way they hovered near the entrance, I guessed they hadn't been invited inside. One of the event coordinators approached them, speaking in polite but firm tones. Michael gestured toward me, and the coordinator glanced in my direction as if to confirm. I lifted my glass and smiled faintly. They didn't come over. Instead, they lingered a few more moments before slipping away into the night. It was almost anticlimactic, but in a satisfying way. This was never about confrontation. It was about letting them see, again and again, that I didn't need their permission to live fully, and I didn't need their narrow definitions to dictate who I was. After the main course, a man I'd met at the hotel, a retired architect from Milan, asked me to join him for a walk on the terrace. The sea glittered under the moonlight, waves breaking softly against the cliffs below. You seem, he said, searching for the word in English, free. I thought about that. Yes, I replied. I suppose I am. The next morning, my trip wound to an end. At the airport, I saw Michael and Jenna again at the baggage drop. This time, they spotted me first. First class again? Michael asked, trying for lightness, but failing to keep the edge from his voice. I met his eyes. Yes, I like the space. There was a pause, small, but heavy. Then Jenna spoke, her voice quieter than I'd heard it in years. You didn't tell us you were coming. I didn't think I needed to, I said. I go where I want to go. For a second, I thought she might argue, but she just nodded, her mouth a thin line. We boarded separately. I took my seat in the wide leather chair, a flute of champagne in hand as the engines roared to life. Somewhere behind the curtain, they settled into their rows. Looking out over the runway, I thought about all the times I'd kept quiet, all the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping the peace. This time I hadn't needed to raise my voice. I'd let my actions speak. And they had, loudly. Back home. The air felt cooler, sharper, carrying that faint scent of autumn. I rolled my suitcase through the front door, set it down, and stood for a moment in the stillness of my own living room. Travel always changes you, but this trip had done something more. It had reminded me that my life is still mine. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the leaves sway in the breeze. My phone buzzed with a message from Michael. Glad you're home safe. Maybe we can have dinner next week. No apology, no acknowledgement. But there was a shift in the tone, something less certain, as if he finally understood I wasn't someone to be managed or dismissed. I typed back a short reply. We'll see. The truth was, this trip wasn't about teaching them a lesson, though that part had been satisfying. It was about teaching myself that I didn't need their approval or their inclusion to live the kind of life I wanted. For too long, I'd been the woman in the background, the one they could pat on the hand, make decisions for, speak over. That woman didn't book first-class tickets or check into top-floor suites. But she could. She did. And I would again. As the kettle clicked off, I thought of my husband and the promise I'd made him to keep traveling, to keep living, even if I had to do it alone. I smiled to myself. This time, I hadn't been alone at all. Not really. I'd had good company, good food, and the kind of laughter that comes when you stop trying to fit into someone else's idea of you. I took a slow sip of tea, the warmth spreading through me. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold. Somewhere, there was another city, another trip waiting. And the next time someone told me I couldn't afford it, couldn't handle it, couldn't belong, I'd remember Barcelona. I'd remember walking past row 24, my scarf catching the light, my head held high. And I'd book the ticket anyway.